Have you ever wondered, can you communicate directly with spirit guides, teachers, or non-physical consciousness, or even our higher selves? What would they tell us? My name is Kevin Moore, and since 2015, I started to practice a form of communication which is termed channeling. I have been interviewing experts on my talk show to find out, does life continue after we die? And can we communicate with those that have crossed over? With each expert I spoke to, they all had different ideas. Is there knowledge from the past which could be shared with the present moment? So I thought, why not just speak to the non-physical world directly through channelers around the world? And that's what I set out to do. They Call Us Channelers will take the viewers on a journey into the phenomena known as channeling. And my main goal with this docuseries is to bring a new understanding and awareness to channeling by looking within ourselves and asking, is it truly possible that we can all use this innate ability?
My name is Julian Polzin. I was born in Germany in 1984. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and as it is so often in life, we make our plans to get comfortable. We believe we know what our future is, and I was thinking I'll be sitting pretty with being a psychotherapist, but I experienced a great loss in my life. And experienced a tremendous psychological pain at the time. It's probably when I was around 30 years old. And when that occurred, I was thinking, well, I'm a licensed psychotherapist. I might as well figure it out. I might as well analyze myself. I might as well see how to release this trauma. And I started walking on a graveyard every day and sitting on benches. And at the time, I didn't understood what I was doing. I was looking on the name at the names on the gravestones and basically realizing how short life is, because of course I saw the dates where people were dying, and there were a lot of people actually died in World War II on the graveyard. Interesting to watch. And I was sitting on the park bench and experiencing tremendous psychological pain. The mind becoming very negative, intense automatic negative thoughts that wouldn't let up. And at some point I had the very, very simple thought, I'm so tired of fighting this pain. So then something in me completely surrendered, gave up all attempts at controlling or manipulating this pain in any way or trying to get rid of it. But then suddenly I entered a state of complete silence where there was no psychological activity. There was neither thought, nor emotion, no experiencing of memory, or no expectation, no experiencing of future. There was complete silence and emptiness. So I basically entered the sense of a void. The only thing that was left was awareness, but everything else died. And so I realized what I actually practiced on the graveyard was dying. But I didn't want my body to die. I wanted my ego to die. So when I entered this ego death experience where there was no psychological activity in the Buddhist sense or in the yogic sense, this is Samadhi. When only awareness is left, or Nirvikalpa Samadhi, or you could call it Nirvana. That is the moment where all psychological activity dies down and the sense of I as a relative subjective self is gone. So when we enter the state of complete psychological inactivity, this is when we become aware of God, and God is simply awareness. But there are no attributes to observe. And there's no borders, no limitations. So then we actually realize, well, on the deepest level, we are God. And when I entered this state of complete stillness, I started slowly downloading past life memory. At the time, I didn't know this, but there was a lot of déjà vu around Zen-Buddhist practice. And I started basically automatic writing, which was a channeling at the time, where I started writing down, if you will, Zen koans or Zen riddles, or explanations about Zen practice, And what's very, very interesting about that the person, Julian, of course, had no formal training in the matter. I didn't go to Japan. I didn't have a Buddhist teacher, but I started remembering all these things with a tremendous precision. And I didn't even realize what I did until I started listening to other spiritual teachers and realized, wow, they're saying the same thing, just with different metaphors, or let's say in their own unique style, but ultimately they're saying the same thing as I'm saying. And then I realized I tapped into something universal. And if you want to, this was the beginning of channeling for me. First was writing. While later down the line, other practices I started remembering, like, for example, Kundalini practice and how to open the third eye and so on. And then I started seeing my teachers, which were often yogis from India or old Buddhist masters that I would see basically as a holographic light projection that only I could perceive. And they would start teaching me about certain forms of yoga or meditation or shadow work and all types of mystical practices. And then at some point, on occasion, they would come through as, let's say, a collective of enlightened beings that would take over my mind and my body and would start speaking. But what's interesting about that is that I'm not a trance channel. There is no trance. I'm completely aware when it happens, and I could at any point in time, I could just step out. So it's basically I'm sharing mind with them while I'm fully aware.
That is fascinating. Your whole work is very different, very different. Now, what is the spiritual movement like in Germany as well? Was there much support when you was going through this transformation, in a sense?
Absolutely not. Because the difficulty is with Germans that they are still on some level processing the World War II trauma. So they are very much in the mind. They're not very in touch with their feelings. And since they are overly obsessed with the scientific method, it's very important to understand that the so-called age of enlightenment in the West, from their perspective, was the age of modern philosophy. And it was basically the separation from the church, because the church was dictatorial in its nature. So then suddenly the worship from something divine moved into worshiping the intellect. And it means that the people are very dissociated. They don't have their intuitive guidance system activated. So many Germans are very robotic. So the difficulty there is then very simple, how to communicate such experiences. And I needed to be very crafty. I had not only a psychotherapy office in Germany, but a Zen school. And I was first teaching basically Zazen, meditation practices, mindfulness. And I tried to, in a loving way, trick the German consciousness into having an experience. I wouldn't say what the methods do much. I would just teach the methods and hope that people would have an experience, so then they would open up. But it's very, very difficult because people who are in the intellect are very fear-based. And they have a hard time when intuition kicks in, when guidance system kicks in, relinquishing control. So it was very difficult to teach in Germany. And when I compare this to my travels, for example, to Nepal or now being in Peru, these are very different people. They're spiritually very open. So when you talk to them, they're lightening up. You see sparkles in their eyes. You see curiosity. They're very easily teachable, or they're just very curious or share their own spirituality, because many of them, for example, here in Peru, are descendants from native tribes with shamanic traditions. So it's very, very different. The Western mind, in fact, as we know it, is a relic of the Atlantean consciousness. And this is what the Westerner doesn't know, that they have a modified mind. And they have been basically, through reincarnating, they have not resolved this mind. This mind is persistent.
Yes.
Yeah. And
yes.
It's basically the experience of being trapped in a box with thought.
Absolutely. Even though I do feel that the American consciousness, there's something here in the form of that spiritual evolution. There's something about the American energy. There is a something different here as well. I feel. I mean, some people have predicted predict or say that, the consciousness evolution will be from America. Well, sometimes it doesn't seem like that on the outside, but there is a pull here for spiritual people to come to America. I will say that as well. But definitely where you are, I can imagine people are less, as you say, they're less indoctrinated. They're more open to what you're probably teaching as well.
Yes, because like when you share experiences about visions, about communication with spirits, this is something that the people here who are descendants of the Inca are much more open to, because they might actually have people in their family who had also experiences of communicating with spirits. Yeah. So, for example, we were looking here for land in Peru because, again, we wanted to build a monastery to teach the yogic system, also a Buddhist system. That will be a very integrated system that I will be teaching. And we found a beautiful place that is basically completely embraced by a mountain peak, and on the other edge of the property, there's a wide mountain river, so it's completely private. And I was meditating there to see what are the energies like. And I experienced an Incan deity living in the mountain peak and actually inviting us and saying with open arms, build your temple here, please come. And at the same time, I saw on the astral plane, there were 5 shamans who were sitting in the middle of the property and putting a seed into the ground. And I could see a kind of etherical tree growing into the higher dimensions. And they showed me the saints and the masters will come down this tree once the temple is there and whisper into the ear of the meditators and teach them. So it's very interesting that when I go to different places that have a higher energy frequency, the same happened in Nepal when I would go to different Hindu temples or Buddhist temples, that whatever entities were like associated with those temples, I would experience them in meditation.
Now, Julian, just tell us your website. It is?
My website is www.julian-polzin.de.
Okay. Well, that will be linked on the screen throughout this interview. We're also going to be putting up your book as well, Beyond Psychotherapy, The Laughing God Behind the Masks. Very great book. I've flicked through it, and there's a lot of depth to what you do. Let me say that. That's probably what I was trying to say earlier on as well. Now, you wrote that book while in Germany?
Yes.
Yeah.
I started writing it, I think, in 2017, and I kept updating it.
Right.
So
yeah.
That's a beautiful thing about modern day life and technology, that we can actually update our books.
Fantastic, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
It's so clever. Yeah. So you've been updating that. Okay. As you grow and on your journey, then you're able to add to it as you feel that you need to change it. So now, services that you offer. What services do you offer on the website as well? So people can contact you internationally, of course.
Well, what I do offer are online sessions. And in these online sessions, again, I cannot say honestly and authentically that I'm practicing psychotherapy anymore, because like I've gone beyond that. So my difficulty was simply this with regards to services, is that I actually want to move away a little bit from the psychotherapy, because people who expect me to be a psychotherapist, they're often in a state of self-limitation. So they only accept then that I, in their fantasy, act as the role of the psychotherapist, when I'm actually, and that took me a long time to admit, when I'm actually a spiritual teacher. So in that sense, what can happen in sessions, energy healing, channeling, sometimes I remove dark entities, because dark entities and mental illness are actually very much connected. When you have someone who, for example, expresses on the surface a personality type disorder, what you often can see on the astral level are demonic entities that are using, let's say, the shadow aspects or the traumatized energy, which we could call the karma body, as a bridge to telepathically influence people. And this is how mental illness developed. One needs to be very careful about saying that to people when they have superstitions, because they might get very scared and actually like obsess over these ideas when they don't have really actually access through their own senses. But in general, what do I do then? I channel often, and I scan people's past lives. So I look into their energy to see why their trauma persists or why they're behaving in a certain way at this moment. And usually it's surprising how much of it is past life trauma that we then need to bring up and integrate. So then clearly, yes, there is an element of psychotherapy, for example, Socratic dialogue, simply that I start questioning the belief system that someone has, which of course is part of the ego structure, or of the matrix programming that we all got when we were born into this world. So to question it in a Socratic dialogue, so they soften up their belief system and are actually open to receiving some sort of intervention or inspiration. And then depending on when people open up, there is the possibility of channeling, of energy healing, and so on. Usually what I first do, I teach meditation. Because when you can teach someone to step out of the mind, it doesn't mean their mind will be quiet. That takes a few years of practice for most, that they can actually turn their mind off. But for meditation practitioners very experienced, it's like flipping a switch. At some point, it's not hard. But in the beginning, it's hard because they basically need to starve the ego out by learning how to be non-reactive. So to understand this, when we experience thought and we then judge the thought, we generate emotion. And emotion is what you could call lower astral material or lower astral force. And when we use astral force, we basically energize our container that is the ego structure. And I try to teach people not to be reactive to mind. Now they stop feeding the mind and the mind begins starving. And interestingly, you can actually see that the mind is starving when one of the practitioners said, well, I had a near-death experience in meditation. Because when you're actually about to have a death experience, you are about to have an experience of transcendence. Yeah. But many people are scared of that. So they don't go through the door even though the door is wide open.
Wow. Just on that, I don't know why, I just want to add this here. I wasn't going to add this, but have you ever done ayahuasca or any sort of ceremony like that in a sense, or any sort of mind-altering substances that do give those sort of, greater versions of ourselves access to speak to us and communicate to us?
Well, yes, I think I had about 4 psychedelic experiences, some with psilocybin, with LSD, and a derivative of LSD that was legal in Germany at the time. So you can just basically order it. And actually, these experiences were quite profound. Especially one experience where I experienced my past life in Japan, where I was suddenly could see that there was a holographic overlap. I was basically sitting in my apartment in Germany, but suddenly I saw the Japanese temple and the furniture and the clothes that I was wearing in tremendous detail. But the reason I let go of psychedelics, because very quickly I started remembering the yoga of how to develop these abilities naturally. So basically, when I now meditate, I can remote view my past lives. I can interact with deities or ascended masters in a very direct way. So I find it very important because right now, for example, in Peru, Peru is a plant medicine place. But we are on purpose. We are now not living in a place where plant medicine is widely used, because a lot of people have spiritual experiences on plant medicine that they're actually not ready for because they don't have the spiritual maturity to integrate it. And it's a business. So they do massive sessions with 200 people. If someone's trauma comes up, there's no way when you have 200 people that this can be integrated and properly treated. So I find it rather irresponsible. So I'd rather say that to learn the proper yoga, to develop psychic senses, there are very precise ways of how to trigger the activation of, for example, the third eye, or how to trigger the Kundalini practices and so on. But all of these things need a spiritual maturity. And this is something that you see in the West a lot. When there's a failed spiritual awakening, what we see is psychosis, schizophrenia. This is the result. I had, for example, one client in Germany who, when he was 16, his Kundalini activated way too early because his whole environment responded to him with hostility. And they put him into a mental hospital. They put him on neuroleptica, so antipsychotics. And the difficulty is now every time, because he's now older, he's like at the end of his 40s, every time he stops taking the medication, he cannot handle the energy that is coming up, right? So the difficulty is that with psychedelics, but also with certain yogic practices, that they're often being done too early. The first thing that we need to learn is to be non-reactive. As long as we have a lot of reactivity in the system, when we start having psychic experiences, the chance that we respond with fear is very high. And these yogic experiences, when we build up to them, they're deconstructing you. They're deconstructing the ego. They're deconstructing who you believe you are. So you will have a death and a resurrection experience. But the difficulty is when you're in the death experience and you're being deconstructed and you have a fear response when you are in a chaos state, you don't leave the chaos state, but because through the fear response, a new structure cannot build. And this is when psychosis or schizophrenia occurs. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And, your experience that you had, that was part of your process at the very early stage, just remnants of like Eckhart Tolle, it just feels like a little bit. Do you know what I mean? With, I know Eckhart Tolle's work is obviously different, but that kind of, there's still, that kind of stillness of the thoughts of the mind. I don't know. I'm just picking up on that as I speak to you.
No, that's a very fair comparison. In fact, when I started entering this complete stillness, at the time, I didn't know what was happening, but I also wasn't thinking about it, because when you're in perfect stillness, you're at perfect peace. There's nothing you feel you need to do. But interestingly, after that, I started reading Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now. And then I had all this deja vu. It's like, oh, this is exactly what I'm experiencing. This is exactly what I'm going through. Yeah. So the comparison is very fair. Yeah.
Well, let me just ask you then, what other people, influencers or authors, have helped you on your journey? Who is sort of maybe a more recent one as well that you're studying?
Oh. Well, I have a great love for Alan Watts. I can say that. And but let me speak about this more directly. And it might be challenging for some people to believe, but that's all right. I don't exist here to be believed. I only offer, let's say, I'm a waiter who offers opportunity to be inspired. When I started reading many spiritual books, like I give you an example, A Course in Miracles, for example, A Course of Love, or Alan Watts' writing, or Terence McKenna, or whatever. When I started reading all those spiritual books, in the beginning, I didn't realize it, but the sense of deja vu that as human beings we experience is usually past life memory. Yeah. So when you experience, oh, I've already been there, I've had that conversation, it's because in another lifetime or in a parallel reality, you're actually having that conversation also. So at some point I realized books are not just books, but they're actually portals. So strangely, when I started reading, for example, some of Alan Watts' work, at some point he would appear. I would sit on a park bench and he would sit next to me and he would ask me to comment on his writing. And we would have debates. This could go on for 2 hours straight. Not too long ago, I was with a friend in Italy and I was reading Carl Jung. Suddenly, Carl Jung starts sitting in front of me in a chair. Basically, of course, they're spirits. They don't have to sit, but they do this for our sense of psychological comfort, that they, let's say, give us a human interface that is comfortable for us to interact with. So I saw him sitting and he was debating with me his book, Man and His Symbols. And 2 days later, someone asked me about a dream analysis, which I'm not good at. And then he took over my body and he was leading the session. So I channeled Carl Jung and he was doing the dream analysis by helping that particular client then through past life trauma. And Carl Jung was very, very joyful. He said, like, thank you for giving me the chance for having another session, because he's in spirit. Of course, he can't counsel people here. So And so for me, this experience is very intimate. When I start reading a book, what happens is that I start tuning into the frequency of the consciousness that has written that book. And then I experience dialogue with the authors. So my experience then is very direct. And I'm not saying that's miraculous because it's achievable for everybody. It is just that most people don't want to have such a direct divine experience. It actually scares them. Because once you start tuning into the Holy Spirit, and what do I mean by the Holy Spirit? It means all being in spirit who are benevolent and are following the law, the divine law of love. Yeah, there are many malevolent spirits also. One needs to be very careful what one is channeling. But when we start tuning into the Holy Spirit, what happens is that teaching stops being indirect, it becomes direct. Now, the difficulty with that is when you start, for example, have daily dialogues with ascended masters, is that their logic and their understanding is so profound, so you have no excuses anymore. So you can't live a life of avoidance. You cannot say, I don't want this experience, because they're going to give you a perfect explanation why you need that experience. And this is why for most people, they actually don't want to meet God, because if they do, there is no way they can pretend to be a little I that is identified with the relative subjective psychology of a human. And then they have no excuses anymore not to be brave, not to be courageous, not to be authentic, not to be an expression of the Christ consciousness, so to speak, right? So this is why often the term surrender is used, or to allow, allowing, because it is simply that the more we tune into the Holy Spirit, our localized mind is beginning to be replaced with a higher mind, and the Holy Spirit starts basically impacting our neurology directly, energetically. What will happen is that our local mind will shrink. And it's basically just a tiny little thing in the background that sometimes throws out a comment or tries to interfere, but it's so minuscule then. And then higher forces take over the body, take over the psychology. And this is something that many beings don't want, which is their right, because they want to be immersed in a human experience. They want to have a genuine human experience. And that is fine, until the suffering wakes them up and they say, I want to return to God. Now they need to surrender.
When you say that you were suffering at, you went through a phase of deep, profound suffering, was that something very personal that you went through? Was that somewhat death or something of some sort? Or
no, that was the end of a relationship. And I think it was a pivotal moment. Because when you look at Western society tries to sell, for example, romanticism as a form of enlightenment. You find your partner is going to relieve you from suffering. You're going to have this perfect relationship. But of course, that's nonsense, because once you are intimate with someone, all the shadow energy or the dark energy that you have not taken care of will surface in that intimate experience. So it wasn't so particular about this relationship that I left, but it was the accumulation of many relationships that ended, because in an ego state, the ego is externalizing liberation. So it believes that there is some sort of condition that will liberate you from suffering. Yeah, either it's a job, it's a relationship, it's a circumstance, it's something you want to achieve. But the ego will never be happy. No matter what you achieve, it will start attacking this then. Because the ego doesn't want you to enter the present moment. Once you enter the present moment, I want to be clear on the matter, the present moment is not the present moment. It's your timeless state. It is what is beyond Maya or illusion. So once you enter the present moment, you step out of your psychology. You step out of the karmic container. And the ego structure doesn't want that. So it tries to constantly keep you in conflict. So you think about past and future. So I had to basically realize after that relationship and after several relationships that ended, I understood suddenly nothing in this world can give me satisfaction long term. There's nothing in this world that can give me lasting peace. And this is when I became open to another possibility, where I suddenly popped out of the limited state, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. And I mean, obviously, you're in Peru now, and you've been in a long-term relationship for some time. And I think, as you said off air, this is you would class as your twin flame, and
Yes.
someone that you've been together previously in past lives. You would both agree with that. And does she help you with your work at all, or does she have a separate career to you, or?
She's an artist, and she used to be an artist in her past life. In fact, you can actually see the paintings on the wall in the back. This is her art. And it's actually very interesting because she channels through her art. So often she's painting and she can hear ascended masters talking to her while she's painting. And they give her images what to paint. Yeah, because anything in the universe is frequency. And when you use colors in a certain way, this can be an activator, yeah, for psychic experience or intuitive experience. And what she does, she's basically channeling from the Holy Spirit and then putting, how can I say, let's say, hiding divine symbolism in her art. Often she doesn't even know that she's doing it, because sometimes she paints something and it's prophetic, and let's say half a year later we suddenly realize what it meant because it came to pass. Yeah. And the thing about twins is, and that is very important, there's a lot of romanticism going around with the idea of twins, but this will lead to utter devastation for people, because twins are not there to make you feel comfortable. Nothing will trigger another being as much as a twin flame, because they are supposed to refine us. And actually, what twins do, they're having separate incarnations, and then they try to meet in another incarnation and see if they can synchronize their energies. So often that leads to a lot of conflict and frustration and trauma until they actually can synchronize the energies, because they have to retry over and over thousands of years to actually get that going. So then the idea that there's the perfect love out there, I want to be very clear, everybody goes into enlightenment alone. So you cannot rely on a twin. You cannot rely on a romantic partner. In fact, if I meet someone who could be a lifelong practitioner, it's often better if they're not in a relationship. But a twin flame relationship is a spiritual relationship where it's not about romanticism, but where it is about offering catalyst to one another and bring the unconscious parts out. So that means very challenging shadow work, very challenging purifying of karma.
Yes, but
which is not pleasant.
I mean, no, I get it, right? I hear you. But you still live a human life together, right? I mean, you're still here as a human, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and with all the good and the bad that come with that as well. But yes, but you see it from this different perspective as well, which is well, like I say, there's a lot of depth to what we're saying, what you're saying here. So just before we move on, you mentioned it, so I just want to go there as well, about people being very careful with what they channel. I want to use the word discernment. I guess it's the same, because you've got that mediumistic side as well, right? You have that, you're
Yes.
open to that ability. You could say that, discernment also needs to be applied to that, but yes, with channeling, very much so, because it's yeah, I mean, when you open the door, anyone can come in and have a coffee with you. You just want the right, what the right energy is, wouldn't you? I mean, how much does it come from love? How empowering is it? All the positive aspects that should be there. But please, I'd love to hear your answer.
Well, discernment is the name of the game, and it is very, very challenging indeed. There are certain ways of trying to ensure that what we're challenging is not of a lower frequency band. Now, for those who are just opening the door to this, there's a very simple thing to check. If I hear telepathic voices, do I feel lighter? Do I feel joyful? Do I feel inspired? Or do I feel heavy? Do I feel scared? Am I suddenly more concerned? Or are my desires going through the roof? Am I being sexually stimulated? Is my pride stimulated? When you experience strong emotion in channeling, it's usually a sign of lower astral entities interacting with you, because they will try to get you into a lower frequency band so they can have influence over whoever has opened the door. Now, there are very proper yogic practices where we basically change our energy in such a way that we're past the lower astral realm. There are forms of tantra that we use to, for example, bring the sexual energy into the higher dimensions so it cannot be intercepted on a lower frequency band. There's Kriya Yoga, where we basically, we could call it an angelic breath, where we start breathing in divine material from the angelic dimensions. We start changing our energy, because understand, for example, when you send electricity to water, through water, the water is the medium for electricity. So your energetic makeup determines what you channel. And the difficulty for many people is this: when they start doing, for example, Kundalini yoga, and they open up their psychic senses, that they're first in the lower frequency channel. Now, the lower frequency channels are mixed because the Holy Spirit can use them, but so can demonic forces. So basically what we're doing is we're doing shadow work where we integrate our past life traumas, because wherever we have rejected ourselves, wherever we don't love ourselves, is where demonic entities try to get their hooks in. They use this as a bridge to give us telepathic material. So we need to make sure that we purify our energy system so they have a hard time breaching the high frequency threshold. But many people don't do that. And what I've recently seen, especially during the pandemic and a certain quite popular injection, I'm not going to say it outright because I don't want you to get demonetized or whatever, is actually that there are many mediums currently who were present in Atlantis when Atlantis went down, and they were corrupt and they don't remember it. Because in fact, there were two major factions in Atlantis. One was the children of the law of one, who were led by the great spiritual teacher Master Thoth, who later went to Egypt to create the mystery schools there. And there was a certain group that is represented by a modern group who I'm not going to name because this is going to be a little bit too intense. And they were for augmentation in cybernetics and genetic modification, because they didn't believe they could go through the initiations of the Holy Spirit directly. So for a lot of people who wanted to be led and didn't want to develop actually yogic practices, so to speak, what they did, they wanted to be enhanced by technology. And there was a point where a reptilian collective, who also worked with dark AI systems, basically offered the Atlanteans to enhance them. And to them, they believed they could be initiated in such a way. So the reptilians said, we're going to enhance your intellect. And this is exactly what they did. This is what we now experience as the modern Western mind, who is a hyperactive thought machine that basically functions like a firewall, where you can't sense your guidance system anymore because there's compulsive thought at all times. So the Atlanteans who did these type of augmentations, they experienced themselves cut off from their higher mind. Now they were trapped in a box with thought. So they experienced fear, because disconnection will lead to fear. So, and instead of admitting the mistake, because of pride, they did even more augmentation. In the end, they built generators with which they tried to get people into an energetic state, basically transcend the physical body. But they drilled down into the earth core because they wanted the energy from the earth core as well. Destabilized the earth crust and the tectonic plates, led to tsunamis, led to earthquakes. And many of those beings at the time who were tempted by technology, but also had a certain degree of psychic ability, are now channeling a certain injection is fine, even though it is an ascension blocker. This is literally what it is. It blocks ascension, it blocks initiation, it blocks psychic ability. And it kills a certain amount of people. But they're saying it's fine. They're saying it's fine because they have not integrated their Atlantean trauma. And in fact, those who were for augmentation, they wanted to unify the world at all costs. And because they wanted to unify the world at all costs, they were ignoring the corruption amongst their midst. And this is why we saw such a split in the spiritual community, where some part says injection is fine and some other part says is absolutely not fine. Because these are the same people that, for example, knew what was happening to Atlantis and went into exile. These are the people who say injection is not fine. And there are those who said injection is fine, who were on the side of augmentation. But when we augment ourselves, we pervert our systems. And we lose our natural ability to tune into God. And the same thing is going on right now. It's the exact same energy is now resurfacing as the Western mind. And in a way, it's very fascinating how time works. One time, a deity appeared to me and said, well, I'm going to teach you about time now. It's important that you change your understanding of time. And she showed me 2 discs that were horizontally placed upon each other. And the deity said, look, if we make holes in the discs, these are particular events, like the Atlantean downfall, for example. And when we now turn those discs and 2 holes align, the karmic energy of the previous cycle will re-emerge in the current cycle. And this is what's happening right now. The Atlantean energy is back and the downfall of Atlantis is ongoing. And this is why many mystics have, for example, left the Western world. This is why we are in Peru. Because when Atlantis fell down, those who knew it would happen, they went to Egypt to build colonies. They went to South America to build colonies, to preserve the mystical knowledge. And that's the reason why we're here, in Peru, to build a monastery.
Well, there is major change going on right now. Financial collapse, political collapse, wars. This is a very this time was prophesized. Let's not say it wasn't. Many mystics, many people have spoken about this time. Yeah,
yes,
we knew it was coming, but it's definitely a ramp up right now. I mean, you don't have to be ultra sensitive. You can, it's just there, isn't it? There's so much uncertainty and it almost feels like a cycle that has to happen. As much as we talk about Atlantis, but the potential downfall of what happened there. I mean, yes, history repeats, but there's something about this time that's very special as well, I think.
Yes, and it is because it is what many would call the soul harvest. Because at the end of every cycle of soul evolution, depending on the energy cocktail that you are, which is a magnet, basically, it magnetizes a certain manifestation, a certain reality or timeline for you. It's basically through the spirit evolution that you went through in let's say the last 25,000 years, it will determine what dimension you go to next. And there are, let's say, 2 major streams of potential Earth experience that people can have. One is very dystopian, total dictatorship, total control, technocracy. And the other one is, of course, what we call the new Earth, where there's a mass awakening, the return of not Christ, but the Christ consciousness. Yeah, the mass awakening. So we see basically 2 parallel realities who are currently manifesting. And for many who are awakening, they already sense, for example, that they can't connect with certain people anymore, can't talk to certain people anymore because it doesn't match their timeline. They might think of someone, or I should call this. You can see basically that there is a split of 2 realities. And at some point, we can't experience each other anymore if we have a different karma. Because if someone has a heavy energy, they will have to it's like in school, you didn't graduate, you have to redo. They will have to go through another round of experiencing ego, of experiencing a dystopian reality because they didn't choose a higher possibility. To choose a higher possibility, we need to be spiritually awakened and then to transmute our karma through the alchemic process. So then our energy, which is basically mirrored by physical reality, because physical reality is nothing but a mirror of our consciousness. Everything that you experience, you have attracted it to yourself through your karmic makeup or your karmic cocktail. So this is why there is no such thing as victimhood, because you cannot experience something that you're not a match to. So in that sense, if I change my energy, my manifestation will change, or the mirror, or how physics mirrors my consciousness by giving me a certain experience will change. So basically, our energy now determines which timeline we are going to experience. And if we, for example, are doing the same mistakes that we did in Atlantis, our timeline will be one of a fall. If we have learned from those lessons and we have gone through genuine initiation, we will experience a different earth. We will experience a more open, more free earth, a more abundant earth, a more loving earth. Yeah, an earth where there's wisdom and remembrance of ancient practices, but also of the actual history that was erased, yeah, by our modern society. Yeah. So the human is a being with amnesia, and those who are spiritually awakening, they're beginning to undo the amnesia, if that makes sense.
It does, and thank you for that. And going back here a little bit, but maybe it's going forward as well. I just want to state that you do feel that one of your stronger past lives is obviously that as the founder of the Zen Buddhism movement. And not that it matters, right? Because, maybe past lives are happening now, not like as we feel as it like in the past, but actually in the real time now, concurrently with this one and all the other virtual realities in a sense, right? But multi-dimensional realities. Do you think there was a reason why that life in particular was a pull for you to know about? Why that one, do you think, for you to have remembered in a sense?
Well, everything that I did remember came in a certain chronology, so to speak, because a lot of people might ask why they don't experience their past lives, because it would destabilize them. The difficulty is this: once I started remembering that, and at the time I was still living in Germany, I was not living in a temple. I didn't have a group that I was teaching. So when you have a past life and there's a certain success in that past life, it can make you hostile to your present life. And then you have a very, very hard time actually taking the curriculum, so to speak. So we can only remember our past lives when we're actually ready to integrate that, because there is a danger. There's a great danger of developing spiritual ego, for example. I think the past life as a Zen teacher, I remember that first because it's the basis of all spiritual practice that comes later. Why is Zen the basis of all spiritual practice? Well, in Chinese, it's Chan. In India, it's Dhyana. It means the same thing. Yeah, it's basically the practice of detaching from mind and entering stillness. If that is not developed, once we do certain higher energy yogas, what happened? Exactly that, psychosis, schizophrenia, destabilization of the psyche. So the memory of the Zen practice had to come first, in order to be the foundation for the house of yoga that I would build later. There were other lifetimes of being, let's say, a spiritual teacher in India twice. And I also had memory of living in Tibet and teaching in Tibet as well. But the difficulty about that is, again, that it can lead to a sense of tremendous responsibility, like a weight of responsibility. The more you remember, the more you can make yourself suffer. So only when you're very detached can you handle past lives.
What about in this lifetime now, right? There's always the talk when I interview people about and I feel sometimes this way as well, that the importance of living in purpose in this lifetime right now, doing that which really is a more of a passion than anything as well, to really go into what you feel is a joy for you to do in this lifetime. Yes. Now, for some of us, that joy may not look on the outside as though it's of service. And maybe some of us don't go into doing things that, we don't think to ourselves, well, oh my God, that's of service, so I'm going to do that first. But yes, it's my passion as well. Mostly it's like, oh, no, that's what I'd love to do. And most times that there is a byproduct of service from anything we do automatically, right? But what do you think about doing things of purpose, as long as you're not hurting no one or yourself, whatever that may be, and then versus being in being in service as well?
Well, purpose is not fakeable. You cannot fake it until you make it when it comes to purpose. Passion and purpose go hand in hand. And you can only be of service if you are authentic. Let's say someone says, well, I want to be of service. I'm going to be a nurse. But they actually don't enjoy being a nurse. They won't be really of service. So our passion and service go hand in hand. And usually when we feel inspired and creative, we actually not in our local mind. This is when, for example, artists or musicians, when they experience a flow state, is actually when they're channeling, because everybody is channeling something. So when an artist starts channeling, let's say a great pianist, for example, they are not in an ego state. So when we follow our passion, we actually feel energized, because now we come into alignment, into an actually higher timeline that represents our higher selves. So, but the difficulty for many people is when they have received so much programming and trauma, they can't tune into their guidance system, so they don't know what they're passionate about. So it's very difficult. It's very important to deconstruct first whatever belief or identity they think they have, so they can actually tune into their passion. And then passion becomes service. That is important. Only when you are authentic can you be of service. So our main goal needs to be to become natural first, because we have become unnatural. When we become natural, when we remove the obstructions that stop us from channeling who we truly are, then passion will arise, and passion will always lead to service. It cannot be otherwise.
Yes, and that of service may seem pretty weird sometimes for some people, but I'm not judging. I'm just saying, that without judgment, it can be a number of things, can't it?
Yeah, it can. There are many ways to be of service. Yes, and when you understand that the creator is complete, that the creator is whole, of course you will experience others as weird, because they will embody an aspect of the creator that you are currently not embodying. But as a totality, we are complete, because every angle, every aspect of who we are is covered. And different beings will express different aspects of the creator. And when that part isn't integrated within ourselves, it seems alienating. Yeah. But if that part is integrated, we will resonate with that as well.
I do think as well that when you are so out of purpose and so out of passion, right? Say passion first and purpose, whatever. They're both the same thing to me sometimes.
Passion
right?
is purpose.
Yeah,
one
right,
of the same.
right. When you're so out of alignment of that, and you've been doing something that maybe even to yourself, as you say, you're not even aware that that how your misery is based on just this fundamental thing, right? And you've just been ignoring so much about yourself. Life has a way of getting you out of that, and it may not be the most pleasant time to get you out of that, right? To shake you up and to say, look, this stops.
Because in a way, I remember there were some old channelings of Master Saint Germain. I don't know what the book is called. I have it somewhere on the shelf. And they speak about the great divine director. So there is a hint that our reality is directed in some way intelligently. So in a way, we will always have the experience that we need, not the experience that we want. Because our little localized self would want certain things. I want to be comfortable. I want to watch TV on the couch. I want to have potato chips. I want to drink cola. But maybe that's not what the higher will wants for you. And now the interesting challenge here is this. When I say that, it might be very uncomfortable for many who identify with the mind. Free will is ultimately an illusion, because when you realize through meditation practice at some point who you are, that you are the ultimate on the deepest level. Yeah, if we would deconstruct every holographic reality, you would arrive at awareness and you would be in the void, and you're like, oh, that's me, and that's everybody else also. When you start arriving there, you will realize that the divine will is actually your own will. And then you couldn't divert from it anymore. So the ego illusion creates separate will from God. But when you realize that on the deepest level, you are that divine origin, how can you go against yourself? So from that moment on, separate will is over. You will basically enter a divine stream where the separate will cannot persist.
Absolutely. And I'll truck in this as well. Different countries have different karma. I'm sure of it. You know, when I go to some of these Asian countries, when I have been there before, it's very much about what you do, what you have, you know, your status in a sense. And there's so many people, you know, living to their parents' expectations and not living to what they really want to do. But
Yes.
they chose that country, that particular circumstance, that place, because that's the place to really get that, you know, type of challenge and experience from. So you would say that, I'll ask you, do you think that, would you feel that we choose our parents, we choose the situations that we come into, sort of, you know, pre-birth agreement in a sense?
Absolutely. And the reason for this is that, like, when you are in spirit, when you are in a higher dimension and you receive teaching there, because there's a lot going on in other dimensions. It's not like, oh, there's heaven and you're going to be in eternal bliss. No, there's going to be teaching on the other side as well, but it's going to be theoretical. And then again, let's say you can read hundreds of books about playing football, but it doesn't mean you can play football. In order to play football, you actually have to get on the field. So in spirit, we see life theoretically. And I remember actually one time I worked through something with my wife. She had a certain fear about expanding in a certain direction. And I saw how she, when she was in spirit, she looked at example lives of certain masters like Buddha and Yeshua. And when she looked at that, she saw what was necessary to achieve such a state. And that was terrifying. The sacrifices, the amount of suffering, the amount of catalyst that you had to experience to actually go into such a state of existence. So when we see this from spirit, we see this in theory, but once you are immersed and the amnesia kicks in of who you are, and suddenly you believe to be this interface, the body is just an interface. That's all it is. Yeah, it's like a suit that you wear so you can experience this dimension. That's all it is. But once you're in it and you experience its instincts and emotions, immersion happens, ego is generated, and suddenly there's total amnesia of who you are. So from spirit, you might have a perfect plan. I'm going to get this catalyst. For example, I'm going to Japan, where young people are quite suppressed in their self-expression. So I can oppose my parents to actually refine my self-expression by using this catalyst positively. But when you're then there, you might have forgotten why you chose this.
Some souls come into this lifetime, and it seems from my outside perspective, and I'm sure yours as well, where they have never, and maybe will never look into that spiritual side. Maybe they're not supposed to. Maybe their part in this play is to be that expression.
Well, in a way, you always meet yourself, don't you? Because everybody's you. And this is something that I can it's very difficult to describe. I recently had a little bit of a health scare. I had a heart attack and I was in the ICU and I left my body. And then I went into the higher dimensions, and in the higher dimensions, I could see that everything was perfect. That basically all these people are having the experience that God wanted to experience, and that all these people were God. And who am I to disagree with that, because I'm them as well. So there was just love. There was no resentment in any way. So what I'm trying to say is this, that you meet people who in time appear less evolved than you. And they're younger versions of yourself. If you could see your other lifetimes, you would have had lifetimes like this as well. Now, I give you an idea about that. In psychology, we often speak about extroverts and introverts. Extroverts are actually people who are very much into the material experience, who get excited about cars, who love to go clubbing, who want to meet as much people as possible. Yeah, so they are in an external movement away from God into the immersion of the human experience. The introvert who starts maybe with an interest in psychology or poetry or whatever, who starts withdrawing from the world more, is actually one who's on the return movement to God. They don't know it yet until they start spiritual practice. But basically, we move away from who we truly are, give ourselves amnesia, so we have a genuine experience, and then our soul is being imprinted by experience, therefore individualizes. And once we have accumulated sufficient individualization, we want to realize the ultimate again, because after a certain point of individualization, we're done with the suffering. We're like, oh, that's too much suffering. Now I want to remember. And then we're looking for ways out. And then you have these so-called chance encounters, which do not exist because there are no random events. For somebody, this might be a local priest who has a certain degree of wisdom, and they suddenly have a conversation that they previously weren't brave enough to have, and it expands their reality a little bit. Next thing you know, they might meet a wise psychotherapist. At some point, they might meet a spiritual teacher. So when you see people who are not interested in spiritual experience, from the perspective of the void, from the perspective of the I am, from the timelessness, we're all equal because we're all that. But within the illusion of time, we also have the illusion of different levels of evolution, if that makes sense.
It does. And how's your health right now? Are you on the mend? Obviously, hope you are.
Oh, I'm very well. And I also know that the death experience that it wasn't a near-death experience, it was a death experience. I was supposed to have that. It was orchestrated.
You seem so enlightened. I mean, I'm surprised you needed that, but was it just more confirmation?
Well, let's say when I experienced ego death in meditation, that's one thing, but to actually completely separate from the body, that's another experience. There were certain, let's say, energy surgeries or certain alchemical processes that couldn't happen while I was in the body, actually had to get out. And interestingly, when I experienced dying, so to speak, I experienced all the symptoms that all my previous me's had when they were dying. So I was basically re-experiencing the death of the multidimensionality of me. And in a way that led to a softening, to me becoming even more gentle, because once I experienced myself on the other side, so to speak, and I met my teachers in spirit, but very, very interestingly, I went through very dark dimensions first. And I had to rise up from those dark dimensions to meet my teachers in spirit. But once I started meeting them, I was just overwhelmed with grace. And coming back, I could not see any being as something other than me. I suddenly felt an immense love for everyone I met. When I was in the hospital, like every nurse that came in, I was super joyful to experience them.
That's cool. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah.
I might have been quite intense at the time. I guess if I tell that story, my wife would laugh a lot, because I appeared like a child when I came back. Like everything was wondrous, everything was beautiful, everything was lovable.
Would you say, because you kind of mentioned this, but I just wanted to just go back there a little bit. If I said to you, okay, Julian, is Julian's soul more in charge of Julian's direction, or is there a free will? Do you have free will in your, and any of us have the free will in the experience, or is the soul leading us, and does the soul know better in a sense? And soul's just a word for,
Let me give you a return question. Why suffer? See, if I want to have separate will, I would have to go against the totality of my oversoul. I would have to go against the divine plan. And that would mean tremendous suffering. Why suffer? Suffering is utterly pointless. There's never a reason to suffer. But we choose to suffer because we say, I want something other than God.
Well, what about I want something other than the experience that it is now. Is that the same thing? I guess it could be, because it's. Are you saying then that, okay, why suffer? So just flow is what you're saying.
Well, who says there's anything wrong with your experience? Maybe your beliefs about your situations are distorted.
That could be true.
Yeah, when we resent the present moment, it's not, the present moment is always perfect. It's exactly what we need. It mirrors our consciousness perfectly. And that's what love is. Because love doesn't keep you stagnant. Love grows us. It grows us. When we have children, we grow them by teaching them. So what I'm saying, the experience is a teaching experience or a learning experience. So when we don't accept that, first of all, we need to realize we have no control and no power whatsoever on the human level. As long as you believe you can influence this reality from your localized mind and say, I'm going to have a very individual experience that's very separate from what the whole universe is doing, what's going to happen is you're going to go against tremendous forces and currents in the cosmos that try to bring you into a certain level of understanding, or to a certain level of understanding. So right now is always what is teaching you. So if we resent right now, it means that we have an ancient belief that it can be a past life belief, it can be also current life trauma. But there is a belief that right now is not enough. Right now needs to be more. So when we say that, we go into conflict with the timelessness and we create psychological turmoil.
Okay, yes. But we are able to shape this. I mean, if I say, okay, I'm gonna, I want to go and do this. I think my passion. Let's go back to that. My pull, my passion, my love is this. I'm not there yet, but I'm going to go towards it. It feels like you have some ability to draw that in. Something always comes along better or more in alignment with what's really best for us. But it's kind of like there is some similarity in what you first wanted to attract. Yeah. We're saying, I choose that, then we're bringing it in. But you're saying, actually, maybe you're not.
No, I think that's a little bit of a misunderstanding, because you are actually listening to your intuition. You are listening to your guidance system. That's why it manifests.
Oh, right. So you're not going against it at that point.
Because you're feeling the passion.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the passion comes from your higher mind. And that's very difficult to understand. Like, imagine that your oversoul is kind of like an octopus, and it has these tentacles, and imagine they are wormholes and they reach into different realities and into the heart vortex. So you might be hundreds of people at the same time, and they connect in the oversoul, which is the higher mind, and the higher mind remembers everything harmoniously. Now your higher mind knows exactly when to give you what download and what initiation. And on the human level, you have no control over that. But what you can consciously choose on the human level is to go beyond the human by listening to the guidance system. When your passion arises, for example, when you're excited about a certain documentary, like recently I was, for example, watching Ancient Apocalypse with Graham Hancock. Very fascinating, especially if you have Atlantean memory and you know about the flood and what happened. So when something is in alignment with you, you will always feel some sort of elation, some sort of elevation, some sort of enhancement, some sort of energetic, let's say, joy. And I give you an idea about that. There was a prayer that I received one time when I was meditating in Germany. There were several angels who appeared, and they gave me the following prayer, and they said, in God, I disappear. In love, I dissolve. In compassion, I am one. In forgiveness, I am free. In joy, I am home. And that's the hint. When we follow our joy, we are in alignment with our passion. And now all those past life incarnations who had a theme, that's very important. There is a theme in your oversoul. For example, if the theme is enlightenment, there will be different past lives or parallel lives, if you so want to, where you had mystical practices going on. So many of the yogis, we start remembering, for example, I was a Sufi on a mountain somewhere in, I don't know, the Arabian desert. Or they remember I was a Buddhist monk, or I was a yogic practitioner here, or a shaman there. And then you see that basically what we're trying to understand, we're trying to paint an image of God, because God cannot see himself, God cannot know himself, because God has no attributes. So God creates the illusion of limitation in order to experience the unlimited from the perspective of limitation. So we go through these limitations that refine the soul, that create soul imprints, basically. And then you see a theme, and the theme gets stronger the more experience the soul is and the more wisdom the soul has. For example, then if I look at my last past lives, they were all spiritual teachers. So the passion becomes very specific at some point. Yeah? While in the beginning, the soul might be more in a chaotic state, might try this, might try that, and until through the refinement, the theme becomes stronger, the energy stream becomes stronger.
We'll come back to that chaotic state just in a second as well. I just want to add this. Now, look, I'm not going to ask you to channel, right? I actually feel that, yes, you've probably spoken about this stuff before on different forums, right, in a sense, and even to yourself. But I do feel that everything you're doing is a form of channeling right now. Would you agree?
Yes, because I'm speaking from my higher self, not speaking from Julian.
Right. Yeah, that's a better way of saying it. Right, absolutely. This is how it would be with, well, I guess a session with someone would be a little bit different, but it's still, Julian is present with this higher energy.
Yes, it would just be more specific, because what we would be looking at would be the specific karmic imprints. I can give you an idea what that would be like. I had, for example, one client who wanted to go through a divorce but was too afraid to do so, and that soul experienced itself like as a woman at the time. So that lady then said, like, why can't I leave my husband? And I asked her then, can you feel something in the body? Is there any pain in the body right now? And she said, well, my right knee is hurting. So I go into a state of meditation, I close my eyes and I start scanning her energy, and I look into her knee. And then I see a past life in Poland, probably medieval times. I'm not exactly sure. But I see her then husband, who was her current husband, pulling a wooden cart through a muddy road. Like, yeah. And suddenly the axis of the cart broke, and it fell on her right knee and crippled her. So from that moment on, she had the belief she is dependent on her husband for survival. Because she couldn't walk on her own well, she couldn't take care of many things. And that belief was imprinted in her energy field and stopped her from divorcing in this lifetime. And it's very specific.
Yeah, absolutely, it is. Yeah, yeah. So you're able to tap. So that's kind of how you tap into some issues as well. That's interesting. Very interesting. Thank you for that example as well. And just going back to when you mentioned about chaotic lifetimes for some souls. Sometimes, and having a bit of experience with people in this situation, people incarcerated, right? People locked up for life and other things that they've done, right? That they've obviously, done whatever they've done. And, you think to yourself, why is this soul having such a chaotic life? You've been in prison for 30, 40 years. All the destruction that caused for your family and others around them, right? And
the catalyst that has provided, if I would reframe it.
Yes, the growth, but then growth doesn't always look like it's a beautiful thing, does it? I mean, it can be, someone's growth could be they're still not even forgiven the person even after all those years, and they're working on it. Growth, it looks so different for everyone's journey, doesn't it? We're having this conversation, and there are so many people in different situations out there, aren't there? That we maybe don't consider sometimes, but even someone that's been that's spending a lifetime in prison or has done some atrocity to another. They came here with free will. This is what they were supposed to go through, I guess. This is what they were here to learn. But it feels like so, when we talk about finding passion and purpose and everything else, but for a person that's not free in other situations on this earth, maybe they can still find it in such situations as well.
Well, of course, that's going to be very, very challenging. But the thing is, the more challenging an experience is, the more catalyst it offers. So let's say if you forgive a murderer, it might be more challenging for you to forgive a murderer than maybe to forgive someone who cheated on his wife, right? Because we have a sense of degrees of acting from separateness or degrees of acting from fear, right? And separateness leads to fear. That's very important to understand. So predatorial energy that manifests in the human experience comes from the belief of a lack in energy. So I'll give you a simple example. If we take a sexual predator, for example, what I've often experienced when I scan people for past life trauma, when they, for example, experienced to be a victim to someone who expresses pedophilia, for example, often we find out when we remote view the life of the predator that they were actually abused as well. I give you an example. There was a young lady from France. She was like 25 years old, and when she was a little girl, like 11 years old, her parents left her at her uncle's apartment. And her uncle was very sweet. He gave her toys. He gave her chocolate, and at some point he started massaging her and slowly turns it into sexual activity. Very traumatizing for the child, because now in that moment, because he was sweet first, she started associating love with abuse. Yeah, it fused. And then she had a lot of dysfunctional boyfriends who would beat her up and all these things. And she wanted to come to an understanding of, how can I forgive the predator? How can I forgive Uncle Louis? So I actually remote viewed his childhood. And what I saw was this. He was beaten by his parents, and he was an altar boy. And the priest was super nice to him. He said, "You're such a cute boy. You're such a sweet boy." And obviously the priest raped him at some point. So basically, when we judge, we become what we judge. So he judged the priest for doing that to him. But when we judge, we cannot release the energy that the predator put in us. So then we start expressing that as well. And this is how actually predatorial behavior comes to pass, is when we don't forgive the abuses that we have experienced, and we start embodying that, because everything we judge, we become, in order to compassionately understand that. Because God doesn't want us to graduate half. So we need to have a total understanding. So we need to understand the predator as well. We need to have compassion for the predator. And interestingly, those people who judge predators harshly, I can tell you in their past lives, there were predators, and they're so afraid to touch that shadow energy. They're so afraid to touch that they externalize it and project it. Yeah, when someone says kill all pedophiles, yeah, well, what do you want to kill in yourself that you don't want to touch? And interestingly, when I did these type of past life scans with people, pedophilia was one of the main traumas. And there is nearly no soul who doesn't have sexual trauma. It is so common, in fact. And it's very important to demystify that and to stop saying this is something special where we need to be especially panicked about, especially dramatic about. No, we need to investigate it. And we need to understand that when we believe to be victims, we match with the predator energy. In fact, victim and predator have the same energy. That's why they experience the same reality. And usually predators have experienced a lack of love. So they believe in a lack of energy. They believe actually that they're not lovable. So they try to get energy through manipulation and control, which we could call black magic, by the way. This is the realm of black magic, is the realm of manipulation and control.
It's still dark, dark energy kind of stuff. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when I manipulate, it means I believe I cannot get into a high energy state by being authentic. So there must be some trauma where the authentic self was rejected. I remember like when Buddha, for example, said, when you truly understand someone, you cannot hate them. That's a fact of life. Like once I told you, for example, that predator who touched that French girl also was raped, is much suddenly you see the little boy, you don't see a monster. So the difficulty is this, though, is that what I'm telling you about these past life scans and looking into these traumas, this is so removed from the average person's experience, right? So it actually doesn't help them because they don't have access to that information themselves. So when you don't have access to that information, that is where the helplessness kicks in, where they don't know what to do and how to answer to the situation, right? And this is why there are degrees of initiation. Maybe for someone in such a situation, it's best to have a psychotherapy experience because they might not be at the level where they can actually look at it from that higher meta plane, so to speak, from that spiritual plane.
Yes, it'll only make them angry and worse. Yeah.
Yes, it might actually increase the sense of helplessness. Yeah, imagine you're blind and someone speaks of colors.
What reference
like,
have you got?
Colors?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of good in counselling, isn't there, and psychotherapy? I mean, there is a lot of good to come out of that work.
Yeah, or sit in a church community, for example.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, because everybody will have the catalyst that they can accept in their reality. Yeah, so even in prison, even in the darkest place, there will be some element of light.
Well, that was my point, really, as well. Yeah, but just yeah, with this work, sometimes it can be very much, for a certain, what's the word am I trying to look for? It's yeah, but I suppose because it's not doesn't seem to be open to everyone, but actually it is. This is, no matter what you're going through, you can apply this stuff, and it's the truth is truth in a sense. Yeah, if I'm making sense. Okay, now Julian, your website, just one last time for the podcast.
Yeah, www.julian-polzin.de.
Excellent. Okay, and again, there's a little bit. Well, there's more information on your website, but information about yourself and your journey in a bit more detail as well. Ways to contact you. We're going to put in the description your book. Your book's been coming up on the screen as well as of ways to contact you, and but everything will be in the description below in the YouTube video as well. Is there anything you might like to add to this as any final message, Julian?
Well, what I would encourage people is there's something very simple. It is that everybody receives intervention. Everybody does. There's nobody who is left alone by the divine. There will always be invitations. And the key is simply to see them. The key is to let go of the bias, to become mindful, to step out of the mind, and to be able to see them in the present moment. So there is nobody who is not within God. No matter how low they perceive themselves, there will always be a higher possibility in every moment to choose. And to be mindful of that. And there are degrees to this. And just because I'm sharing experiences that seem very, very far removed for most people, it's very important not to focus on that and to compare oneself to that, but to look what right now could be an intervention for me. Right? I remember someone who went also through a grieving situation. They were at a funeral, and out of nowhere, a very lovely dog, after they went back to the car, opened doors, suddenly a very lovely dog jumps into the back of the car and shows a lot of love out of nowhere. When you truly understand, that's God. When you don't understand, you say it's just a dog. right? So these interventions happen all the time. It's just that we are afraid to step into the light and that we say no to them.
So true. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just see it from that different that bigger perspective sometimes, that there are no mistakes. There's just experiences.
No. Exactly. Yeah. And even if you should get lost, it's an exploration. Yeah. There's this old saying, yeah, all paths lead to Rome. Well, all paths lead to God. Yeah. The physics of the universe will get you at some point. You can try to run, you can try to hide, but at some point you will be pulled into the light. You will be, let's say, you will lose your amnesia. And this is exactly what beings are afraid of. They don't want to remember all the traumatic past life experience. But when you're being touched by grace, when you're being touched by light, what happens is that you become aware of darkness first. It's kind of like, imagine you have a cellar and you didn't go into that cellar for ages. There's a lot of dust and dirt accumulated. Now you open the windows up. What you're going to see? A mess. And you're like, oh, that's my mess. Nobody's going to clean that up for me.
I appreciate you giving us this extra time as well. Thank you so much. I know we've gone well over right now. So
yeah, you're very welcome.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed the time with this. I just want to say, Julian, just thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, thank you for having me, because right now, free speech platforms are very limited, and it's so important to make the most of it.
Thank you.